Hey folks, welcome back. This is Joel, and in this video, we will continue with our discussion on network automation. I've been getting quite few requests on doing a video on Ansible, so I thought, yeah, let me take this few minutes, to do that, right? So, yeah, let's get started with it, right? So, Ansible. So, what's Ansible? To begin with, Ansible has been around for some time, right? Just put in my bad. Yeah. So has been around for some time, right? So it was mainly used for network. It was mainly used for like orchestrations, deploying servers automatically, and so on, right? So and of late, in the last probably 1 2 years, it has been widely used even for network automation, right? Now that being said, um, Ansible, has pretty nice documentation. In my lab setup, let's start with my lab. So what I have is I have a Ubuntu machine where I put up Ansible, and you will basically find that here. This is my Ubuntu machine where I have installed Ansible, and I'm not sure which version I'm running. Let's probably check that. Uh, so Ansible basically works mainly with Python, right? So Ansible, every single thing inside Ansible is written with Python. So you need to have a little bit of Python knowledge to kind of get started. That being said, let's jump onto my environment, which is inside probably Net DevOps. I think inside I believe you can use Ansible in either Python 2 or 3. I'm using it in 2 right now. And yeah, let's source this particular environment. This is a virtual environment, right? So which I'm trying to source right now. Then activate. There you go. This is my Python 2. And let's see what version do I have installed. Right, so I have the 2.9. I believe this is the latest version. Pretty straightforward to install. If you go down to the documentation, in fact, installing Ansible on Ubuntu, you have various way to do it. I've probably done it by the most easiest way over here, just using one specific command using pip, right? Installing Ansible with pip. So you just go and install, pip install and Ansible, and then you probably will also have to install Paramiko because that's going to be needed as well, right? So that's straightforward, the installation part. Now, as in we go ahead, right, let's probably take few notes as well. Now, when you're talking about Ansible, when you're talking about a project, right, when you're talking about, doing some automation with Ansible, you need to follow certain format, right, certain directory format of the project which you are going to start working on, right? And that's where, let me write down a bunch of things. Like, for example, I would say the first part is inventory, right? Inventory is basically deciding what is, what is the IP address, right? Host name, right? All of that information, right? Basically goes inside the inventory file, right? So where is our inventory? Let's go down and check out our inventory. So for inventory, you'll always have it in this particular location. Okay, so I probably have it here. Uh, I mean, again, you can define your own inventory files and point your Ansible environment towards that, but I am using the default location, which is, you'll find it probably inside the etc folder. You have an Ansible, and if you see, there is a host file over there, right? So that's where you find it, right? So let's do a nano of this particular file so that we can see what we have configured right now, right? So if you see down, this is where I have put in a bunch of things. I mean, forget about the ones which has been commented on the top. That's just examples. But this is what we are using for now. Like I said, in my viral environment over here, so I've set up a viral environment where I have like a bunch of nodes here. One is your CSR device and a couple of NXOS devices. I obviously we can't probably simulate a Nexus 3K, so I'm just assuming the second device to be something like a Nexus 3K, right? Again, because it's a virtual environment, you can put in any number of nodes. I'm just testing it out in 2 3 nodes, right? That being said, let's go back. So here you see I have, this is the Nexus 9K device, right? The IP address of that is 227. Nexus 3K is ending with 228. And so this is the format, right? For the inventory file, you need to put in the open brackets, and I mean you put in the name of the host, right? And then you put the IP address, similar with the Nexus 9K, 3K, and then you can also kind of like define children, right? So where like switches will be like a parent group, and the children will be basically, we are basically defining this Nexus 9K and 3K to be like the children group of this particular parent group, which is switches, right? So now if you want to reference only 9K, then you can use this tag. If you want to reference both 9K and 3K, then you can use the tag switches, right? Similarly, I've done routers, which is where CSR 1000V, and then I also put in the sandbox, right? So if you wanna like try this out on sandbox, you can do that as well, right? So that is where my, let me just exit out of this. That's where your inventory file basically sits, right? Where you define your hosts and all of that. All the inventory basically goes in there. Now, second, you have the inventory. Now, the second part is, the modules, right? Modules are extremely important, in case of my, just reduce the size of it, I guess. Yeah, modules are extremely important in case of Ansible, right? In fact, if you ask me what is Ansible in one single, if you ask me like in a simple terms, Ansible is nothing but a collection, a huge collection of your, Python scripts, right? This itself is nothing but Ansible, right? So we have a lot of Python scripts or modules which have been written by developers all over the world, right, for doing various tasks. We are basically using Ansible to like leverage those and run those one after the other, right? That's literally what Ansible is about, right? So that being said, right? So yeah, back to this. These are nothing but your Python, Python, files. Let's assume it as Python files which are doing specific tasks for you, right? So now we are basically going to be using modules in our code when we run some of our codes, right? I'll basically show you, but before that, let me show you where do they reside, right? So you go down to your, like in my case, I'm going to my Python installation, and you go inside library, you go inside Python 2.7, you have side packages, and here you see you have Ansible, and inside Ansible you'll see a folder called modules, right? Now you see there are so many modules which have been written, right? For this is what I was saying, you have modules for databases, you can do stuff with the storage, right? All of that, right? Now if I go down to something very specific to us, which is network, so I go inside network, you can see these are all the modules which are existing as of today, right? And people are basically writing new and new stuff. You can see modules for ASA, I see ACI, these are all our Cisco products, right? And you have for Citrix, right? Uh, Cumulus and a lot of other modules, right? You can obviously look into the documentation and figure out the modules which is very specific to it and start using it, right? In our case, I think probably we'll be starting with looking into the Nexus modules, right? See, there are so many modules down here, right? Doing specific, tasks, right? Which is pretty cool, right? So you can see the modules here, all the modules. Yeah, so that's the modules part, right? So before we proceed any further, probably let's look at some of the examples which we'll try out now. So first example probably is what I have here is, or okay, I have a playbook, but maybe it's better to explain everything in one shot and then start with the examples. Okay, let's do that. So we have modules, and then what else? The next important piece is probably your, before we go to playbooks, let me explain variables, right? So variables, right? So just like when you write a Python code, you have to define some variables, and then you basically use those variables in your scripts, right? That's exactly the idea here as well. So in fact, in Ansible, you have two types of variables, more specifically, right? You have host variables, and then you have something like group variables, right? Now, host variables are basically very host specific, right? Self-explanatory. Like you have a device, for which you want to put in a loopback IP, right? Or you want to define a new interface, right? All those host specific variables will basically go inside this file, right? All of these are YAML files, right? This is a YAML file. Similarly, you have your group variable as well, which is basically defining the variables for the whole group, right? We defined the groups. Remember in the inventory file earlier, we had something called switches, we had Nexus 9K. So you want to define the set of variables for the whole group, then those will basically go here, right? Even this also is your YAML file. Let me show you an example. So if I go down to my current example, I have like a source code downloaded from GitHub for testing out some of these, examples, right? So what I have here, you can see there are two windows here, left and right. On the left hand side, I'm showing you the variables folder, right? And you see the directory structure here. You have networking, right? That's the name of the folder where my code resides. But you have two subfolders which are group variables or host variables. Or maybe this will be better to understand probably from here. Give me a second. Let's go down there. Let's go to the folder directly from here, from the file explorer. Right, so documents, Python 27, and code examples, Ansible. Yeah, this is the directory, right? So here you see we have host variables and group variables, right? Inside the host variables, you have the YAML files corresponding to the two hosts, which are your NXOS devices. One is your NXOS, I think this is your 9K and this is your 3K, right? So you define this host specific, variables inside these files, right? I don't think I have any group variables. Do I have? Okay, I have a group variables. See, well, define the name of the file is basically the name of the group which we defined earlier, right? Switches, right? If you go back here, I don't think, have I catted it out? Probably not. Let's do a cat here, right? Cat host, right? So if you see here at the bottom, you'll see switches and the name of the IP addresses over here, right? So this is basically just to show you that how all of this is connected, right? So always, I mean, it's not again compulsory you need to have this, but when you're building more and more complex Ansible playbooks, right, this is going to be very useful, right? So you have your host variables and group variables, and you understand the difference now, right? So that's your variables part. Once you're done with the variables, once you have defined, once you have structured your code on what you have to do, what are the variables needed and all of that, the final piece is your playbook, which is the most important piece, in fact, right? So in your playbooks, you basically go and define the task, right, which your Ansible code has to do, right? And that's basically what you see here in my VS Code, right? On the right hand side, you see these are all my playbooks. On the left hand side, I have put all my variables, so you can see this is how the variables look like, right? It's a YAML file, right? You start with the three dashes, and you're basically telling, this is the local loopback, and the name of the loopbacks, the various loopbacks, the values for the IP address, and so on. So this is your, um, these are your basically host variables, right? I have two separate host variables because I have two separate hosts. One is Nexus, probably let me put it on left side. This is Nexus 9K and this is Nexus 3K, right? Now on the right hand side, what you see are the playbooks, right? These playbooks will basically use these variables, right? And that's what you see here. We'll obviously run through the code and understand more in detail, but just to show you that these are the playbooks, and inside the playbooks you see you basically have tasks, you have the name of the task, what it has to do, and so on, right? Various playbooks down here, right? So that being said, probably let me also cover 2 or 3 more other points which I want to just wrap it up before we start playing around, right? The other interesting piece is probably, let me call it as facts, right? In fact, let me write down facts. I also want to just cover conditions, and the other one being loops. Okay, now facts are basically pretty interesting, right? So facts basically Ansible has this. These are also at the end of the day modules, right? Every single thing which you see in Ansible are nothing but modules, right? So facts basically are a very interesting set of modules which uh, basically try to do a reconnaissance of the whole device, right? So if I run facts against an NXOS device, it's going to go and get you every single information about that device, right? We'll actually look into that how it works, but that's the whole idea. You can run a fax against a server, against a network device, against a storage device. It's going to go and fetch all the facts out there, every single information it can find, and it's going to return back, right? So that's your facts. Conditions again are basically, I'm not sure if I have a direct example here. Maybe we will find an example as we proceed. But the whole idea with conditions is that it is just doing the task of like if-else loops, right? You have in your normal traditional programming, you have some kind of if-else statements, right? And that's basically accomplished using the conditions, right? I'll show you how we can do that. The last part is the loops. Loops again, any programming knowledge, programming, language is like um, incomplete if you don't have some kind of a looping mechanism, because that is something day in and day out we basically use. We are going to run this automation probably for 100 devices. You would need some kind of a looping mechanism, right? And so these are this is where the loops come in, and we'll obviously use them as well. So that is your summary, right, of the whole Ansible. I think if you want to kind of like get the idea about Ansible in a quick, if you want to quickly review, this is literally what is there, right? So you have a inventory file, you have modules, right? Inventory file basically tells you which devices you are going to touch. Modules tell you, what are the functions or what are the various operations we want to do. Variables are basically the way of defining the values which we will be using. And in our playbooks, right? Playbooks are basically the like the master, right, which will do the task for you, where you define each and every task which our Ansible playbook or Ansible architecture has to do. And these 3, 5, 6, and 7, the facts, conditions, and loops are basically a bunch of things which we use as we progress in our playbooks, which will make our life easier. All right, so now that we have a little bit of idea about what Ansible is, let's actually play around with some stuff, right? So let's get to that. Let me just open up my environment. Okay, so that looks good. So just to again double click on the topology, I have just like a CSR 1000V, a Nexus 9K, and I'm assuming the second Nexus 9K to be like a Nexus 3K, right? And you already saw the IP addresses. Whatever you see here, forget about those. I've showed you the IP addresses down here. Let me just show you that again. You can see here for Nexus 9K, it is this is basically out of band management, right? So you just need to have connectivity from your Ansible machine to the devices. That's it. Doesn't matter how you get that, but you just need to have connectivity, right? So I have uh, uh, dot 227 on Nexus 9K, 228 on 3K, and then I have 226 on CSR 1000V. Awesome. So that being said, so we have looked into the inventory. Now let's look at the playbook. Let's start with one of the simple playbook, right? Yeah. So the first use case is what we are trying to do here is let's look at this playbook right from top, right? We are basically trying to look at the facts, capability of Ansible, right? I've been talking about this facts, but we'll actually see how this facts work, right? Actually, so you see the playbook again. It's a YAML format. We have talked about YAML in the data formats, section. I think a couple of videos back. Just it's another data representation format, right? Nothing complicated. Just like any other your JSON, XML. It's just another way of representing data, right? And yeah, Ansible basically uses YAML as the default format. Now that being said, you start with the name of the playbook, something like 9K facts, because I'm looking at the Nexus 9K. The host, which which has to on which you want to run this playbook. Again, here I'm running it on one specific device, but I can anytime come and change this to switches or Nexus 9K, whatever I showed you earlier, the names which we have used, right, the group names in our inventory file, we can basically go and change that. Connection is basically local. We are basically telling Ansible to run all this task on the local machine, right? And basically all the tasks are going to be run from the local machine. Obviously, it is going to be executed somewhere else, but the tasks itself are basically run from our machine. So that's the meaning of that. What are the tasks now? So you put a tag here and then you start putting in the task. Because it is YAML, you need to be very careful with all your indentation, right? Otherwise, it's not going to work. In fact, it's going to throw in some errors. Now for every task, you'll start with a name, right? In my case, I'm basically starting with get Nexus 9K facts. You can basically put in whatever name you want. And this is the module which I'm talking about, right? So every time you see something like this, right? Now you see here, we are using the facts module, but you can have different types of module. We'll basically look into those as well. Now, we are basically calling the facts module, and when you're talking about this, you might be surprised, how will I get the name of this, right? I'm showing you a code here, but how do you get that? That's where you go to the Ansible documentation. So I'm showing you the Ansible documentation. You can just Google for directly for Ansible documentation, and you basically land here. Now your most important piece, I mean, after you have installed and all of that, you have a lot of other stuff here, like for example on user guide, you get to see how you can build the inventory, what are the various other ways of building the inventory and all of that, like all the other conditions, formatting which you can change and all of that, right? So use the user guide for that. Now the most important part which I'm taking you towards is the modules, right? So I showed you where the modules reside in your environment, but what are those modules actually, right? That's where you come here. So you can go down to network modules. In our case, we have a lot of other modules as well. and these are the network modules, right? We are looking at a Nexus device. So if I go down to Nexus, NXOS, you see, this is where you land up with, right? Always make sure you're running the latest version and you're checking the modules for that corresponding version. Like for example, I'm checking for the latest version, which is 2.9, which is perfect for me. I wouldn't, you would basically end up in trouble if you're running a different version of Ansible and you're checking the modules for a different version, right? Okay. So now whenever I try out, any module, right, the first thing you come down is you go down to the facts, right? You'll always have something like a facts module. So if I go down to the particular module, you basically see the information which is it is going to return on running it, right? You also can provide some values to the module and it is going to return some module. So always think of module as a Python function, right? Some nice guy out there in the world has written a nice module. You are basically reusing those in your environment, as simple as that. And that's why Ansible is amazing with respect to that, because you have contributors from all over the world. It's a very active community, and you also can like get some errors fixed. If there are some errors, you can contribute as well, right? That being said, you can see here, this is the module. These are the various parameters. Like for example, it is telling you you will have to provide the authentication password, right? You also have to provide authorization. Is it a yes? Are you authorized to enter the privilege mode or not? The password, the actual password to log into the box, the username to log into the box, right? All of that information has to be provided. If you don't provide this, then when you're running the Ansible module or the Ansible playbook, you basically end up getting errors, right? And then you can come back here, validate if you've really provided everything you needed, and you can proceed in that way. Right now, you also sometimes get some examples here, right? So this guy is putting in some examples telling you that this is how you use them, right? So he's using NXOS facts. This is the module name, and he's provided some variables like gather subset, right? You probably would have seen that down up here, right? See here, these are the various parameters. So he's providing some parameters and is showing you the various ways of using it over here, and that's pretty cool. Now, at the bottom, you also have the return values. What are the various values which are going to be returned as part of this module, right? So that's how you can inspect each and every module before running it in your Ansible environment. And that's why Ansible is pretty simple. It's just all self-explanatory. Now let's do that. Let's go and run this. So what we are doing is we are basically calling the module here, and what we are doing is the host, right? For the host parameter, we are basically telling it to fetch it from the inventory host name, right? So in this particular environment of Ansible, or in this context, the host basically refers to the host what you define here, right? So this guy, whenever you define a parameter like this, it's trying to make it dynamic, right? So like tomorrow I can come and just change this host name to a different host name, and this particular playbook would still run because it is not hard coded here, right? So this is kind of templatizing it. The transport, again, you would have seen in the parameters, you have to provide some kind of a transport. We are basically using the Nexus API, right, for communicating with the box, right? So use SSL, validate certificates. I'm not interested in validating certificates. Register is again something which you use a lot when you want to kind of like store the output which is coming out of the playbook, inside some kind of a value, right? So right? So you want to store, just like in Python, you basically store into a string or into a list or something like that, right? In Ansible, you can store it using this module, which is register, right? And now you can reuse this particular variable anywhere in the rest later part of your Ansible playbook. Like for example, here we have obtained the data. Now we want to print the data to console, right? So for printing, we are using another module called debug. But then the debug is internally using the variable which we stored earlier, right? The NXOS data, right? So it's just a matter of a little few minutes until you get used to the syntax, and you try out bunch of modules, and then it's going to be pretty simple, right? So now let's run this. So we are basically interested in doing this, right? So let's go down to let's go down to my close this. It's not needed. I could run it from VS Code directly, but I prefer running it here because I get to see a lot of nice cool stuff. Hope this is the right place. Yeah, so we are here. Let me clear the screen. Let's go inside Net DevOps. Okay, where are we? Sorry. Okay, so we are here. Let's go inside code samples. net DevOps, I believe, or Ansible. Yeah, we're inside Ansible. Now let's go inside networking, right? So let's clear this. So what do we want to run right now is the network YAML. So how do you run it? Pretty simple. Um, Probably you might be wondering. I mean, I've talked about almost everything here except this Ansible.config. So maybe let me show you that before we run the. Why do we have that Ansible.config? So it's pretty simple, right? What we have is just two lines of lines in this particular file. Again, this is not mandatory. So Ansible by default, will use the config file. So Ansible has a config file, right? So you want to do some changes to the Ansible environment, you can go and do the changes. Like for example, the default config file is somewhere over here, right? If I go back to that earlier, let me just clear the screen and probably can see a little more better. Yeah. So you see, I showed you the host file earlier. So just beside there, you'll find the global, Ansible config file. So this one, whatever you do changes here, it will get impacted to your all Ansible, projects going forward, or every place where, Ansible is going to be referenced. This is going to be acted upon, right? So if you want to do some, project specific changes, then you also have a capability to create a ansible.cfg file in that local directory where you want to kind of like run some kind of an automation, and you can put in the file and put in some values, right? For example, in my case, what I'm doing is I'm using the group default. So default is a predefined group in Ansible. I'm saying for all the devices, what you do is don't do host key checking, right? I'm making it false because this is an environment. I don't have all your keys and public keys and all of that, right? So it's all self-signed keys. So that's why I'm making it false, because otherwise Ansible will cry about connecting to the devices, right? So that being said, let's see how we can run. Before we run anything, I also want to show you how we can kind of like test if our Ansible is working fine, right? So Ansible has a ping module which will do that for you. So for example, I mean, this is again, once if you have installed Ansible, you want to test if your Ansible installation went through. So what you can do is Ansible localhost, and you can call the ping module, right? So this guy will basically, do a quick check. Basically, it will try to ping the local host itself. But you see here, you get the output saying ping pong, right? So this basically means that your Ansible is working fine, right? Now that being said, let's continue with that discussion where we are trying to run a very simple playbook. And how do we run that, right? So we are in the directory. You write Ansible and you say Ansible Playbook, and just the name of the playbook. That's it. As simple as that, right? So there you go. Now it's trying to run the network.yaml, right? You can see the name of the playbook is printed here, right? So that's why that is the significance of it. Let me just put this side by side if I can, maybe down here, right? So you see the playbook name got printed. Now it is running the first task, which is gathering of facts. Now you might see that the gathering of facts is mentioned here, right? So that's basically what it is trying to run. Um, let's wait for that to happen. Might take few seconds. Hope I have connectivity and stuff. So it is trying to run this gathering of facts, not for all the devices, but only this particular device, because this is the one which is mentioned in the host, right? So, the gathering of facts, that particular task is completed. Actually, maybe I think I missed telling this earlier. Uh, the gathering of facts is a task which is run by Ansible by default, right? It is run by default, but you also have a opportunity, or you also have a flexibility to disable that. We will see that as well in the later examples. But currently what is happening is, if you see at this playbook, we have not disabled it. So Ansible is running that first, right? Task number one is basically it is running, and then inside our actual task, we are actually running the facts again, right? So it's basically running the same thing twice, right? In our situation, right? So that's what you see down here. If you scroll down up a bit, this is the output which we have received now. You see it ran this gathering of facts, which is run by Ansible by default. It's not because of us, but this is because of our playbook, right? You can see the name, get Nexus 90 facts, and you can see everything seems to be okay. It was able to connect it, and this is all the information which it could gather, right? You can see the information, like for example, it is trying to understand what is the host name, what is the image, right? Where is the image placed in on the box? It is trying to get the interfaces information, right? Gathering the IP address, or it's gathering the bandwidth, it's getting the mask, MTU size, and so on. So I did not explicitly tell Ansible to do this, right? So all of this is defined clearly in the module, right, which is here, right, the NXOS facts, and that's how Ansible is able to get all this information, right? So that's pretty simple. What else? Next is let's do a little more of a complicated task right now, right? So let me also note down a bunch of things what we are doing, right? So we are testing a bunch of things. So what we did is first we tested out the facts. In fact, NXOS facts. This was our use case, right? Let me just write this as use cases, right? So we tested out the NXOS facts. Next, what we'll do is we'll go and play around more. Where let's try the second one, which is we are trying to create a loopback here, right? So sitting here on our Ansible box, we are trying to create a loopback on what? On my Nexus switches. So now you see I have changed the host to switches, and when I say switches, it will refer to both these devices, right? Now you can see the connection part is still the same. The gather facts has been changed to no. The reason is because I don't want it to run the facts, because I've already run it earlier. I don't want it to run because that way I can make the full task quicker, right? Because you see it took quite some time to gather all the facts. Now, if you really don't want that, then you can get disable it this way. This is what I was telling, where it is run by default, but you also have a flexibility to disable it. Awesome. So now these are the tasks. So you see the first task, I'm basically calling it as creating the loopback. And this is where you see the looping coming into picture. So looping in Ansible is done using this with items module, right? Everything you see here is module, right? Always just remember that. So with items, right? It's like a for loop. So it's basically telling your Ansible the task is basically telling Ansible to run whatever is there post this, right, in a for loop, and uh, for how many number of times, that will be defined by this guy, right? So for every single value of this, it's going to be running. So what is this though? Local underscore loopback. Did we see this earlier somewhere? Yes, we did, right? So you see here host variables, you have the local loopback. So this is how it happens. This is how it works, right? You might be a bit confused on how all of this comes into play. So when Ansible Playbook is run, right, when you have the playbook here, right, so this guy by default goes and checks the host and the group variables, right? So the host and the group variables, the files which you have, right, it has the capability, or it will by default go and check these both guys, right? And once it checks, it will load the variables from there into the playbook, right? And that's the reason you basically see here that we are able to directly reference that variable, because we have defined it ourselves, right, on the host variables, and we are directly referencing it here. And we are basically telling it, hey, please continue running this, or run the following thing for every single loopback, right? So you see this is the variable. It's kind of like a list. You can think of it as a list, and you see there are 3 loopbacks here, right? So we're basically running this particular section twice. So, and what it is going to run now, we are using a slightly different module here. We are no longer using the facts module, we are using the NXOS interface. Again, same task, you come down here, go down to the NXOS interface and see what it does, right? So these are all the functionalities and the parameters which you need to provide, and this is the example, right? It can remove the loopback interfaces for you, it can admin down the interfaces for you, so you can do a lot of configuration of the interface, right? So this module is why it is being used. In our case, like I said, we want to again always this item, whatever you see here, that is constant, right? That's the keyword which Ansible uses. So it's more like saying maybe give me a second. I think my keyboard is stuck. Okay, I think it's back. All right, I was just pulling out this pen to show you how this works out, right? So let me just select it. Okay, I think it's better. Yeah. So you see here, this is the local loopback, right? And that's what we are referencing over here, which is fine. But then you have this individual values, which is loopback 1, loopback 2, and loopback 3. How do you how do you kind of like refer these values in your playbook? And that's where the keyword item comes. So you say item dot name, you're basically talking about this guy, right? When you say item dot description, you're basically talking about this guy, right? So that's how you can reference your host variables inside your playbook, right? Hope that's clear. So always remember, item is kind of like the keyword, and you have to use that, right? You can't change anything. So yeah, so when you say item, it will be basically the context for the item would be basically each of these values which you have defined. In this case, it is kind of like a list. If you did not have a list, if you have just one value, in that case it's going to be only that. But nevertheless, you can iterate through the various keys inside your local loopback using the item, right? That being said, let's go back, get this here. Awesome. So now that we know that this is the part of the top, the first task is basically creating the loopback, right? So it's putting in the name of the interface which we have defined, right? So this is where your whole net DevOps comes into picture, right? So look how simpler it has become. I mean, instead of me writing a Python script to manually push this configuration, now I can like put this information in a machine readable form, right? YAML is more like a machine readable form. So I can put this information in a machine readable form, and I can basically make my script, kind of like, or my Ansible playbook understand this particular machine readable form, and it can go and configure it for me, right? This is way ahead of the olden days where we used to do all kind of automation using CLI, right? So like I said, this is creating the loopback, right? It is putting in the various values, the admin state, the description, the mode, what type of layer interface you want. You want a layer 3 interface, right? And then once you have created the interface, you want to put in some information, right? You want to put in some values for the interface, and that's where the IP address comes into play. You need to put the IP address, right? So the first part is creating the interface. The second one is creating the adding the configs for that interface, right? So that's how it kind of rolls, right? So this particular playbook will go from first device 1, it's going to do all of this, then it will do the same thing for device 2, device 3, how many number of devices you have inside this group called switches. Awesome. So let's run this. So we have this loopback.yaml. The execution is going to be pretty straightforward like we did earlier, right? Let's clear this. Let's go here and let's run this. So I think it's loopback.yaml. So let that run. While it is running, let me also show you what's happening here on the device. So I believe I have connectivity to the device here. So Cisco, I think this is also Cisco. Okay, so that's cool. Let me just clear this. Okay, so once this is run, we should be able to see something. So let's see, is it completed? So there you go. We can see the loopback is getting created, right? In fact, we have 3 loopbacks, right? If I'm not wrong, from our VS Code, you see we have 3 loopbacks, and you can see the status here as and when it's getting created, right? You can see first the device 1 loopback was created, loopback 1 was created, then for device 2 the loopback 1 was created, then again went back to device 1, loopback 2, right? And so it's all happening as we have defined, right? I believe there is some kind of a multi-threading by default happening in the background, right? So it might not be exactly sequential. That's why you see something like this, right? So which is yeah, that's fine. So you can see all the loopbacks have been created, and once the loopbacks were created, you basically have the configuration set as well, and that's basically shown as changed. This is a very easier way to understand what has happened. It's kind of giving you a summary telling that 2 tasks were run and both of them involved changing something on your device, and nothing failed, nothing skipped, and so on, right? Now let me also introduce to another very interesting capability of Ansible, which is Idempotent. What is the meaning of that is, let me just write it down here. Let me just probably move this away a little bit to go down. Not needed now. Okay, still stuck. Let's move it down. Okay, so the second piece what we did was we basically created loopbacks, right, which is fine. But what I want to tell you here is the idempotent capability. Idempotent. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but what does this mean is Ansible, before it pushes any config, right, it will check if the configuration is already existing, right? So you want an intelligent tool which can push configurations only if it is absent, right? Or it can do certain things only if it has not already been done. And Ansible is smart enough to do that, right? So I can show you that. So let's run the same playbook again, but this time when you run, you will basically see that it is not going to go and do any changes on the device. Why? Because it was already done just a couple of minutes before, right? So let's wait for this to complete. There you go, it has completed. But you see now, see the exact difference between the outputs, right? Earlier you see you had everything been shown as changed, but now you see everything is okay, and you see the statistics, it says nothing has changed, right? And that's the amazing capability. So Ansible first checks if there is some configuration, right? If someone has already done it, then it is not going to go and do it again. Now, just to prove my point, let me go and change something, right? Let me go down to my YAML files, right? These are the places where I define the variables, right? So let's go to probably one of the devices and change this 3 to 13, right? And it's probably gets saved automatically anyway, so it has been saved. Now when I run the same playbook again, you'll see that Ansible will skip doing the changes for the stuff which is already there, but it will also make sure that it goes and does this change for this specific loopback, right, which is on the dot 228 device, right? We'll check that out as well. Let's wait for this to complete. All right, you see it's completed. At the top you see the creation of the loopbacks. Nothing was done because we already have the loopbacks, but setting up the loopback configs, that's where we changed the IP address, and you see only one of the IP address has been changed, right? And that's the value over here, right? So that basically proves that Ansible is intelligent not to push stuff if they already exist, right? We can also check this on the device now. Probably have it here, right? So if I do show, maybe let's do show IP interface brief, right? You'll basically see those loopbacks getting created here, right? The 13 interface is also, the dot 13 is seen, right? Awesome. Now let's probably move on to checking the same thing out on iOS XE devices. We checked out NXOS, but how do we do the same stuff on probably iOS XE, right? So let me probably open that. Let me just close this. Let's go down to, I think we have this particular GitHub probably has it here, right? So let's open this. Let's open the show as well. Okay. So let's close this. This is not needed. This is not needed. Close, close, and close. Okay. So for iOS XE, again, in my topology, you see I have my CSR1000V, which is a iOS XE device. And also we have the sandbox, right, which is also an iOS XE device. I mean, I can run this as, I can change this sandbox to routers, and then it would basically, this playbook would run on my local device. If I put this as sandbox, it will run on the Cisco DevNet, right? So the first one probably is, again, on iOS XE, what do? Your first step is always going down here and checking out the various modules which are existing, right? So if I do a control F for iOS, I think you'll probably find, here you go. So you have the iOS here, and you see you have the iOS facts, right? Probably we can run that itself, right? Because we have done that before. So let's run the facts.yaml, right? Do we have anything different down here? Probably not. See, you see basically you have the name of the playbook, you have the host, which is sandbox. We're running it on Cisco DevNet. The task is basically, we're using the iOS facts now, not NXOS facts, and providing the information which is needed. These are the parameters which are defined, in that. So we are probably giving the username and password for the DevNet, and we are explicitly creating tasks. So we are storing this information, and then we are retrieving that. So all the information which is pulled as part of the facts will get stored in certain variables, right? That's again done by default. So if you open this particular facts, let's open this facts here. See here in the response, to go down to the response, you see these are the return values, right? And these are the variables where all of the information gets stored. So you don't have to again create a new registered variable and store information in that. It's getting stored automatically in the background in some variables, right? And some of the variables are commented out here. You can try that as try those as well. But here, there are a couple of tasks where we are saying what is the iOS version. So if you want to explicitly pull that information, and if you don't want whole dump of information put on your screen like we did earlier, right? You want only certain information from the facts to be picked, and not only picked, you probably would want to use that in the later stage of your code, right? You can do that, and that's how you do it. See, you can get the version and you can get the host name. You can try this out, right? So we are running this on the sandbox though. So for doing that, let's go back to IOSXE, clear the screen a bit. So we are inside IOSXE and the same task, right? You go and run Ansible Playbook, but this time you run for facts. So you see it's running, the play is running, which is gathering IOSXE facts. It's running by default. Like I said, here we have not disabled the IOSXE. In fact, I believe it will run first by default, and then it will run again because we are calling it explicitly over here as well. So let's see where that is happening. There you go. See, it ran first and then it ran again here because we have defined it explicitly to run. And when it ran, it finally, also ran the remaining two tasks where we are printing out what is the version, which is 16.11, and the host name, which is CSR1000v-1. So it ran everything, right? Now, I think the second task I think we have here is, let's look at whatever we have here, which is the running some kind of a show command, I believe. So what we are doing here is we are issuing some show command, right? Again, we are running this on, instead of running this on sandbox, let's run this on my local system, right? Local lab, which is routers. I'm changing this to routers here so that it runs on my local, local device, which is this one, right? Which is that in my viral topology, this one. Okay, so that being said, what we have is, again, we are running show IP interface brief. So you see the iOS command module has been used. And in the command section, we are basically running this particular, we are giving the exact name of the command. And then we have whatever the host, I probably will have to change this as well to my IP address, the port, and the authorized. Okay, so instead of changing this whole thing, let's probably go back and put the sandbox. I'll show you some maybe in another example where I can connect to my local system, right? So here you go. So you basically have a bunch of information here, and we are running the iOS command module, and we are trying to get the show IP interface brief command. We are storing that in this register variable, right? Register is again a module and this is a variable where we are storing the information. And once we store it, we can like retrieve it, and print it out to the screen using the debug module, right? So that being said, let's run this particular Ansible playbook again, which is your show. Right, there you go. It ran successfully. Again, same thing, right? It gathered the facts. We had not disabled the facts, so it is running. And then it ran the show IP interface brief, right? It collected the information, and the last task was to print it. And that's why you see there are 3 tasks which ran. It obviously did not do any changes on the device and so on. That's why you see this. Awesome. Cool. So that was basically how you can connect to an IOSXE device. Again, same thing. I mean, what we did with Nexus, you're basically doing it on IOSXE. But all of this is good where, we were playing around with the CLI. But going forward, as you know, the network automation is moving towards, model-driven programming, right? So we are moving towards NetConf and RESTConf. So the next set of examples would basically concentrate on that. So let's close this. And let's close IOSXE. Let's open up this RESTConf, right? So in RESTConf, let's I see there are 2 variables, the host variable files, right? We have the host vars folder, and these are the 2 guys inside it. Let me also open up the corresponding playbooks which we are going to have in this particular example. We're going to have Jinja YAML. We're going to get this RESTConf, I believe, and then we can also have the config. Okay, the three guys here. Let me close this. Okay, so there you go. Let's again review this one by one, right? So these are my two files which are corresponding to the host variables. I have two CSR 1000 Vs. One is on my lab, and the other one is obviously sandbox. And all of this information, the IP address, the host name, and all was defined where in my inventory file earlier, right? So you need to maintain the same file name, otherwise Ansible will not be able to understand what does a particular file refer to, right? So this one is referring to whatever I have here is referring to my local system, right? So it is telling, it is giving some information, right? So again, all of this is like I'm not cooking this up, or I'm not making up these values. These are all defined as standardized, as per the Ansible's, host variables format, right? So anytime you can just Google and check what is the format of a host variable file, you'll basically find not only these, probably 100 other, variables where you can go and give the values. In our case, we are basically using this. That's why I've used it. So you see here at the top, I have Ansible connection. I'm basically saying use the HTTP API, basically HTTP, because RESTCONF is only based on get, post, put, and all of that, right? So we are basically saying Ansible is going to use HTTP API. The network, on the network side, we are basically going to be using the RESTCONF protocol as such, right? And a bunch of other things. We are saying the default port it has to use, and so on. The username, password, everything is defined, right? And these are the two variables which will be used, as we proceed. Similar is the case with my sandbox, variables as well. Now here, what do we do next? So let's start with this get module first, right? So we are again running what I say. We are running the RESTCONF. We are basically now trying to connect to the device using RESTCONF and not using like some CLI connecting using SSH and trying to pull data how we did earlier, right? We are trying to use the most latest way of connecting to the devices, which is netconf and RESTCONF. In fact, here we are using RESTCONF, right? So RESTCONF, basically it's nothing but simplified, nothing but it's a REST API approach where we can get information, do some configuration changes, everything using API calls, right? So Ansible also allows you to do that. So you see, this example is basically only what we are doing here is, give me a second. All right. So what we are doing here is getting the information about the interfaces, right? And we are printing it to a certain file. So now this is the chance where I want to show you that instead of running it on Sandbox, I want to run it on my local device. So I'm changing this to routers, which is the group corresponding to my local device. I also noticed here that the IP address is different. It's not the IP address of my local device. I'll have to change this too, because the host variables, right? It has to be correct. Let's change this. Let's go and rename this to, do I have the IP address? Let's see. Probably go down to my here, right? So this is the IP address of, okay, CSR is here. Let's do it here. Show IP interface brief. So the IP address is here, right? Let's pick this IP address and go back here, change this one. Let's rename, right? Let's paste it here. Awesome. So there you go. We have renamed it. And here in my restconf.get.yaml, I'm basically going to be, instead of changing this to host, let me explicitly put the IP address, right? Even that will work, right? Anyway, this is the only IP which is, no, actually, yeah, this is the only IP inside that host, but, I'm explicitly telling to run it on that particular IP. Anyway, so we have saved this. Now I think let's see if this will run, right? So we are using RESTCONF. So let's again go back to our module index and see where we'll find that. I think it's still inside network modules. We'll probably have a couple of calls for RESTCONF as well. Yeah, there you go. See, this is what we are using. We're using the RESTCONF get for now, right? If you click on this, you'll basically see the parameters which you have to use and all of that, right? The path is very important because path is actually what you would connect, right? So like, for example, if I'm right, we are basically trying to get some configs here. Yeah, so we are basically we are not using this path explicitly. We are basically using a slightly different path. In our code, you see, we are using the IETF interfaces. We are getting the interfaces information, right? So that being said, let's go ahead and run this and see how the output looks like. So, okay, let's go back output. So we should go down to the RESTCONF folder right? Let's clear the screen. Now let's do again the same thing what we have been doing, Ansible Playbook. But I think it's okay. Let's see what are the file names. All right, you don't forget about this files folder for now, and forget about, I mean, I've already showed you what this Ansible config has. The host variables I've showed you. These are the three playbooks we have here. So let's run the RESTCONF get YAML for now. Ansible Playbook, RESTCONF get YAML, right? So when I run that, you will basically find, let's see what output you get, right? So there you go. So we have obtained the information about all the interfaces, right? I'm pretty sure this is going to be the same output if we probably run it from the Postman as well, right? So let's go to this. This is my IOSXE lab. So if I run this, there you go. See, this is exactly similar to what we got there, right? So you have the interface, you have the description type enabled, IP address. I think very similar to what we have got here, description enabled, right? IP address and so on. So that's exactly what we did, right? We basically connected to my connected to my device, and we ran this particular path, which is data IETF interfaces, right? Which is, see here on the top, which is the same REST API call which you would do from a Postman, right? So that's what we did using Ansible. But okay, reading is fine, but can we do something more? Right, that's where it gets interesting. So okay, I think we forgot writing down some of the comments. So we did the same thing for, I think we did it for IOSXE as well, right? Earlier we checked out IOSXE, how to connect and stuff. Now we are looking into RESTCONF. In RESTCONF we checked how to probably run like get, right? Get the information using the RESTCONF get API, but can we do more, right? So this is where it gets interesting, and let me take a minute to explain this, right? So if you want to do something more than get, like for example, you want to config something, right? And you know that in order to config anything, let's go back to our Postman. If you see here, in order to config anything, you would probably need the post call to be there, right? So let's see this. So you want to, this is a REST API call to configure a loopback interface, right? Now, if you look at this call, you see on the authorization section, I have the user and password, which is fine. You see, I have the, okay, give me a second. Do I have, yeah, cool, okay. So coming back to this, so this is a post call, right? Whenever we do any configuration, generally it's a post call, right? Authorization is fine. You have the user and password. The headers is also fine, where we are saying, the content type is YANG and JSON, which is pretty straightforward. But generally you have a body here, right? Because we have to tell the device what it has to configure, and that's basically sent, using the YANG format, right? Basically the YANG, as per the YANG model, we have to send some values so that the device understands it has to configure something, right? Now, this is where it gets tricky, right? Even in Ansible, now I want to accomplish something like this. I mean, it's pretty easier to do it on Postman, right? I can do this, but I'm not going to be using Postman in my code, right? When I'm doing a net DevOps project, I would not be using Postman. I would want to accomplish the same thing using my Ansible, right? Also, now think of it in this way. What if I want to configure loopback on probably 100 different devices, right? I wouldn't want to like have this thing hard coded, and I wouldn't. It is going to be very cumbersome. You have to copy this 100 times and put it in my Ansible playbook, right? So a very interesting way, or very interesting feature which comes into picture here is the Jinja templates, right? And that's where the conversation is heading towards, right? So Jinja templates. Let me just take a minute to explain what it does. Right? The name sounds really funny, Jinja templates, right? What do these guys do? So when you have a use case of this sort, right, where you have to dynamically create data, right? In this case, when we want to, like I was explaining, we want to create a loopback, we have to dynamically create the JSON data, right? Before passing it or before calling it via the REST API. And we have to create this dynamically for different devices, right? So whenever you have such kind of a use case, what you have to do is that, kind of use your host variables obviously in concatenation with the Jinja templates, and that's where, the that's what we are basically going to do, right? So to explain it, or maybe let me just put it down here and then go back to the code and explain it. So you're going to use something like your host variables, which are already there, right? You'll use this along with your templates, right? Now, when you say Jinja templates, how it is really helping us is that I can now create a template, right, to convert, or a template which is basically for the post data, right? We saw the post data in the Postman, right? How does the post data look like? So I can anytime come and now create a template here, right? For this will be a template for pushing the loopback information, right? Tomorrow I would want to create a template for something else, pushing BGP information, right? So I can just create this template once, and all these host devices, when I say host variables, they are nothing but your YAML files, right? It will be a R1, R2, R3, and you're going to have like hundreds of devices, right? All these devices can now leverage this one single template to, push the configuration, right? So that's the modular capability of Ansible, right? It brings in this modular capability so that now I don't have to, kind of like define or do this 100 times on my playbook. I can just create a template and reference that template, and I can basically make my host variables, use those templates, right, when that configuration is pushed. So we'll look into an example. I think it'll get more clear. Going back to our example here, right? So we have, let me close this because we are done with the get part, right? So if you see the directory here, I have something called as a host. I have a folder called files, right? You probably would have seen this earlier as well. Let me probably show it here as well. Ansible RESTCONF. See, I have a folder called files, right? And inside that folder, we have put in what we call as a Jinja template, right? Now, what is the Jinja template? Nothing very complicated. It's the same stuff what we saw here, right? This is literally what is Jinja template is. We basically copied this, the post data which we actually have to send to the device. We just copied it and removed those variables, right? The loopback 100, the bits please, or whatever you see here, the blue part, we kind of removed it, and that's what you see here, right? We removed it and we just created the template. And obviously, wherever we removed, we kind of reference the host variables, right? Where are the host variables? These are the host variables, right? So I have, let's say, for example, local loopback is basically is referenced. Then this item.name would basically be loopback 100, right? And the item.description is going to be, this particular description, right? So let me probably change this loopback. I'm not sure, probably there is already a loopback 100 on the device. Let's change this to 31 just to see, that it gets created, right? So or maybe in my lab device, I don't think I have loopback 100. So yeah, okay, let's go back to 100 itself. I was thinking from a sandbox perspective, right? We'll run this on our lab itself. Cool. So so this is my Jinja template. This is how the template looks like, right? So template in this case, templates could be anything. In my case, it is basically trying to convert, the create like a JSON data which will be pushed later. It's a JSON template in my case, right? It's trying to create a JSON template which will be pushed to the device. Now, how does the playbook look in such a situation? So this is the last playbook. I'll probably look into this later. So this Jinja.yaml is a very interesting playbook. So what we are doing here is the name of the playbook. That's straightforward. The device name, right? So this is the device name 172. Is this my device name? 21 dot, yeah, this is my device name, right? This is my CSR 1000V. Under the task, we are saying create the template, right? So we have created a task for creating the template itself, right? And what is the template? I mean, we obviously we have to define the Jinja template, but this task is nothing but creating the JSON data using the template, right? So it's kind of like mashing up the template with the host variables over here, right? So if you go through this, it is trying to use the loop. It is looping through what? For this particular device, local loopback is referenced here. So this local loopback will be used. And you see in the template, what we are doing is we are calling this Jinja template, right? Which is inside the files folder, files slash, ITF interface and .j2. So that's the format, or that's an extension of the Jinja template. So we are calling this Jinja template, and the output of the Jinja template, we are storing it in a particular file called output.json, right, which will then be later in the next will be used in the next playbook. So let's run this. Right now I don't have any output.json, but once we run this playbook, it is going to create the output.json, and it is not creating out of thin air. It is nothing but connecting my template with the host variables, right? Because tomorrow I can have hundreds of these host variables or hundreds of devices, but just using one template I'll be able to create the data needed to be pushed, right? Hope that's clear. Now let's go back and let's run this. So clear the screen a bit. So instead of running this, let's run the Jinja YAML. Right, there you go, it ran, and you see it has run, everything seems to be okay. Something got changed. So now if you go back to my folder, you should see, let's refresh this, sometimes it takes time. See, you see a output.json file created, right? And you see this is literally nothing but the value which we have to push using a REST API, right? The JSON value which is needed to create a interface and put some information in it, right? This is literally what we need for doing that, and we have created that, or we have automated Ansible into helping us create that, right? I mean, I just want to make sure that this point is going across, right? The reason why we are doing this is that because we don't want to manually create this data for each of our devices, right? I mean, my host variables provides the values, yes, because that is in a YAML format, but then I can't really use this in the REST API, right? I need to have a JSON format to send it. Right now, that is where our templates come into picture, right? Our template is now taking this information which is there in your host variables, and it is converting it to a form which is supported by REST API, right? And to do this task, we are using the templates. Now, it is really useful because tomorrow I can have hundreds of devices, and Ansible will automatically create this template and it will use it for pushing the configuration. Now, in this previous playbook, we just created the template. In the next playbook, what we'll do is we'll create the template, and in addition to it, we will also go and push it on the device as well, right? So that we can see that it is all working fine, right? So you see, this is the final playbook which we'll try out. You see here, again, let me change this back to my device, which is, let's change this to, yeah, this is going to be this one, right? Let's save this. There you go. So what we are doing is we are basically creating a loopback 100. This is pretty straightforward till here. We saw in the previous playbook. But once we create this output.json, we are then creating the loopback, right? For creating the loopback over here, and for creating the loopback, like I said, we want the JSON data, right? That's where we are basically passing this for content. We are basically passing the output.json which we just now created, right? Cool. So again, you see here we are iterating. I mean, tomorrow you can have more loopbacks. Right now you have just one loopback, but if you have more loopbacks, it will get created automatically, right? That's what's happening here. The output is stored in results, right? And then we are finally printing out what happened and stuff, in the results, right? So that's your RESTCONF YAML. Let's see if this works. So this is doing two tasks, like I said. It is, in fact, to show you guys that it is doing both the things, let me go back and delete this file again. So let's delete that, because we are creating it again here, right? So we have deleted it now, which means it should still work. Let's go back to this guy here, RESTCONF config, I believe, if I'm not wrong. Yep, there you go. So let's run that. Let's see if it is working. All right, interesting. So we have got an error. It's good that we get errors. I mean, it gives us a place to go and troubleshoot. So what has happened is, you see the first task ran properly, which is creating the template, which you already saw earlier, but creating of the loopbacks did not work properly. So it seems to me that there is some issue with the RESTCONF's Ansible module. So let's go and troubleshoot it. So you see, let's go to my Python, let's go to library, let's go to Python 2.7, site packages. Again, inside Ansible, you will see the modules, right? Go inside modules, and you will find RESTCONF. Okay, you'll find network, and inside network, you'll find RESTCONF somewhere. Yeah, here we go. And we were using this config, right? So let's open this. Could not display. No, sorry, did I open something wrong? Okay, okay, so this one. So let's open this, and here what we are going to do is let's scroll down to the place where they are telling, the post, uh, the get post and all of that happens, right? So if you scroll down here, you see this is the place where we are getting the error, right? If you see the error, let's go back here. The error basically tells that already exists, resource already exists, right? So that's exactly where we are getting the error over here. Resource already exists. And it seems to be that what they are doing is, if the method seems to be post, right, by default they are actually throwing out the error, right? We need to fix that, right? We need to change. Probably in a newer version of Ansible they probably will change that, but for now, for our module to run, we can fix this, and I can show you how easy it is to do any changes here according to your needs and kind of post, right? So let's go and remove so much, right? Let's go and be a bit risky and adventurous. Let's remove that, and let's change this to just candidate, right? I'm doing this with a little bit of Python knowledge, right? You can also try that out, right? So let's save this. It's saved. Now let's try to run the same thing again. There you go. This time it ran. There was no error. See, the template was already there, so it did not run the template part again. But this one, it ran, right? It created a loopback. So if you go back to my secure CRT and run this, we should be able to see. There you go. See, there is a new loopback which has come in, loopback 100, right? This is exactly what we wanted. And that's what it did. So let's go back to the code. There you go. So it did that. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Now, there is another way to do the same thing without using the whole Jinja templates, right? I mean, it might not work in all cases, but in this case it works, where you can use a parameter inside the REST config itself, right? Where they have defined a parameter called content. And if you have your string data, right, you can convert it into, you can convert it into JSON automatically, right? So you see here we have defined one more variable, right? New lookup, right? And you have this data which is actually needed to be pushed into pushed while creating the REST config. So you can use this variable, right? And then you can convert it to JSON using this here, and it should give you the same results. Probably I'll not run it, but that's a way to go about it, right? Let's actually wind this whole conversation with another last part of the template. What we'll do is we will go and delete the interface, not just create it, but delete it, right? So let me just go and uncomment this one. Toggle line comment. There you go. So now have enabled the delete task as well. So it's going to create the template, then obviously create the loopbacks, and it will print out the results, and then it will delete as well, right? But you see, since we have done all of this task 1, 2, 3, probably it's not going to run those tasks. Rather, it's going to just run only this, right? So we can check that out. So let's save this. Go back to my go back to my thing. Let's run this again. There you go. So it ran, right? So you can see here at the bottom, the delete was executed, and probably if I go back to my device now, it should probably, that particular loopback 100 should have vanished, right? Pretty cool. All right, so that's pretty much what I wanted to show. I think we probably, one thing is we did not cover is the, we did loops, we did facts, we didn't probably do conditions. But conditions, the use case is pretty simple, right? If you have, say, a bunch of devices like iOS XE, NXOS, and all of that, and you want to configure something, across, then what you could do is you could probably define a condition saying if the operating system matches iOS XE, do this. If it is matching NXOS, do something else, right? That's a good use case. Cool. So that being said, let's quickly recap whatever we did. We looked into what Ansible is, right? A basic structure of Ansible. Again, this is not everything. Probably there is a lot of other stuff which you can do with Ansible. It's just a quick start for people who are looking at automation, network automation using Ansible, right? You do a bit of, you create the inventory file. You look at the modules, right? Various modules, various network modules specifically, how you define your variables, right? Host variables, group variables. Playbook, again, playbook is also a YAML file. And we also looked into how we can gather facts, how we can look into conditions, how we can create loops in our playbooks and so on, right? Then we looked at some very interesting use cases where we used NX API, right, to connect to the NXOS devices which we had. We ran the facts, we created some loopbacks, right? We looked into why Ansible is idempotent, right, where it will always first check if the device has the configuration. If it has, then it won't, basically run those commands, or it won't change anything. If it doesn't have, right, or if whatever change or whatever task which it is supposed to do has not already been done, only then it's going to do it. Then we looked into how we can do the same thing on IOSXE devices, connecting to IOSXE. We ran facts, we ran some show commands, right, CLI commands. Then we moved to the final stage, which is using RESTCONF, because we are all moving away from CLI, moving away from show commands. So RESTCONF basically is very interesting. So how you can connect to a device and run certain things, how you would have done it in Postman, very similar stuff can be done here. Further, we finally ended our conversation with Jinja templates, where we said in this particular use case, we were trying to basically look into how we can create a loopback. And for doing that, we saw that we wanted something like this. We wanted a JSON data, right? But if you look at my regular, the variable files, we don't have JSON data. We have like a YAML information, right? But how do you convert from here to that JSON information inside our playbook? Because that is what is needed, right? So that's what we did by using Jinja template. So we are basically calling the Jinja template, which is defined only once and then can be leveraged for like hundreds of devices, right? So we are basically calling the Jinja templates over here, and we are telling it to basically create the JSON information using the host variables, right? So host variables are generally used in conjunction with your Jinja templates to create certain files which will then be used in your playbook. So here we created the dot output JSON, and then we used it, the JSON file, we basically used it for our post, and then we finally deleted that interface as well, right? So hope that was useful. It was again a very brief quick understanding of Ansible, and come back for more videos. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.